great pleasure in using it in my classes with doctoral students and using it with dispersed research teams. And today we're going to be learning about Dedoose from Dr. Lieber. And so, Eli, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. And appreciate you reaching out and making time and everybody's interest. So my plan for the time that we have together today is to just shoot through a few slides and give you a little bit of background on where this all came from, how we've thought about building the platform. Ryan had some specific points for me to hit, so I'll make sure I do some, comparison to some traditional qualitative data analysis packages. I do have some resources that I've put together, so Ryan, at some point we can connect and I'll send you. We have we actually just finished a 2-day workshop training guide to introduce Dedoose, so that could be a great guide for anybody who's interested in teaching the use of Dedoose or teaching methods in the Dedoose context. So let me just get started. Just as a really brief background, I was originally trained as a quantitative psychologist. I started doing qualitative research and mixed methods research as a postdoc, and I've been at UCLA for 20 years now, where I was really hired to be a methodologist. So it was a lab set up in a center which is a multidisciplinary social science group doing research in all different kinds of areas. And more as people were starting to integrate methods, if they were trained in qualitative traditions, they were subcontracting the quant work, and vice versa. And so it was the center leadership wisdom to center all of those resources. And so for my entire professional academic career, in addition to doing some of my own substantive work, I've worked in the service of others. So I've had I love research. I love the problem-solving challenges that we engage in when we're putting projects together and dealing with all of what falls out as we go through that process. So it's really been a pleasure for me. I feel very fortunate to have had this opportunity. And it's also through that work that I've been exposed to a lot of research, a lot of people coming from different research traditions. They're bringing different kinds of data to the party, and they want to interact with them in ways that are comfortable and familiar to them. So Dedoose was really an outgrowth of some needs that we saw that were unmet in the work that we do at the center. So just as a really simple introduction, we've been talking about Dedoose as a research and evaluation data app. And the reason that we're using that acronym and that description, it's very intentional to move away from what we've traditionally referred to as qualitative data analysis software. And the reason for that is that these are really information management systems. And especially coming from a quant background, when I started to talk about these tools to people, particularly those with quantitative training, they were looking for the magic. They were looking for the button that would calculate something. So there's something happening under the hood, and then it would present the results of a correlation or analysis of variance. And that's really not what's happening with these tools. And there's a lot of work being done to sort of create automated coding and things like that, and I can tell you about what we're doing in that realm. But really, we're as scholars and as researchers or evaluators, we're really running the show. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, and I'm going to show you an illustration of sort of what we're doing with the tool, and then it's the features of the tool that let you work collaboratively, analyze, visualize, and all of that. So the drivers behind Dedoose, in vivo was, well, it wasn't in vivo when I arrived at UCLA. It was called Nudist, but it's evolved into the in vivo product, Atlas TI, and others, and I was trained on them. But what we saw happening in our center and with the people that we were working with was that most of what people are doing most of the time, if not all of the time with these tools, really didn't capitalize on these kind of high-end features that were available. So, a simple comparison is if you think about what percentage of Microsoft Word features any one of us uses, there's a lot of these fancy tools or fancy, functionality that most people really didn't need. These tools are relatively expensive. They weren't available for the Mac back then. And we do a lot of collaborative work. We work with teams that are geographically distributed. We're training people that are in different places. And when we have teams of researchers working together, we need the the interface itself to be as intuitive as possible, because if we spend hundreds of dollars and weeks training an assistant on a piece of software when their tasks are relatively simple, we're really wasting our resources. And so again, so this is where the idea of efficiency and effectiveness and convenience, and the internet was popping up as this really interesting place. And so when you think about distance learning and working collaboratively, the web is a great place to get that kind of work done, as opposed to back in the day when we were mailing floppy disks back and forth. So those were the big drivers behind the development of Dedoose, and a web app turned out to be a natural fit for what it was that we were trying to accomplish. And we're really proud of what we've produced, because it's very satisfying to see how many people really appreciate it and are taking advantage of what we've put together. So when we think about what we're doing with these tools as we build a database, we're creating a web of connections. And so this will give me a chance to introduce a little bit of our terminology. If you look at the different packages, we use different terms for the same thing. But what we call descriptor data in Dedoose are your quantitative, demographic, everything that you know and collect from your research participants or the settings in which you're working, from those types of perspectives. And descriptor data can be demographics, they can be ratings on test scores, they can be levels of agreement to a particular to different statements. And so these are data that at the high end I'm still going to analyze in SPSS, or much of them. Although I will say that our next build will include some descriptive statistics. So we're building into Dedoose t-tests, analysis of variance, chi-square actually is already in there, and correlations. So you'll be able to do some of that work inside of the environment, because we handle numbers in natural ways in a Dedoose project. So these are data that live happily in a spreadsheet, and so we can import them directly from a spreadsheet into a project. Then we're going to have our qualitative media. These can be images, documents, PDFs, movies, audio, any type of qualitative data that you might be collecting or gathering. And then what do we do as researchers? We then build code systems to tag content from a really purely qualitative perspective. And it's this work where the hard intellectual heavy lifting takes place, because again, there's nothing magical inside of these tools. It's really you that's driving it, and the quality of the data that you've collected, assuming you've collected it from appropriate sources, and then the nature of that code system is going to determine the quality of the work that you're going to produce. And so code systems evolve, and I'll show you in Dedoose how flexible the code system is. And then we go into our qualitative media, identify chunks of text in a document or clips on a stream or regions, and then tag them with any number of codes from our code tree. So it's these connections that are being created or in some ways automated within a Dedoose project that allows the data visualizations, the filtering, and then your movement through the database as you carry out your investigation. So these connections are critical. This is my last slide before we jump into Dedoose. And a couple things I just want to point out. All of these different aspects of a database live independently, which is the nature of a relational database and why they're valuable and efficient. There is a memo system in Dedoose that can be used from grounded theory perspectives of tracking that analytical journey, making notes to self that can be free floating, or they can also be linked to any object. And so an example of how we use memos a lot is when we're coding. So if we're starting a project, we're all just kind of getting our heads around the code system, or maybe the code system's expanding. And so as we go through and interact with the qualitative media, things may come to our attention that trigger a thought. Maybe we're having difficulty determining if we should be using a code or not. And so that's a perfect place and time to create notes to self, link it to the object that was triggered this thought, and then we can export all of that information together. So the memo content along with whatever it was linked to, so that the team has everything that it needs right at hand to have that conversation about making adjustments. All right, so that's just one example. Memo systems used really very flexibly. And in teaching situations, sometimes there's a folder in a project where the instructor leaves notes to, so week 1, this is what Dr. Lieber wants you to do, and all the members of the class know when they get into the project, go to the memos folder, pop it open, and see what instructions have been left for them. 2 other things just to mention about Dedoose that are unique characteristics. One of them is what we call a code rating or weight system. And a simple example here is I'm going to show you our demo project, which are data from a study we did with families with children in Head Start programs. And so we were tasked with investigating the home literacy environment to get a sense about what were the activities and routines in the home that were going to give these young children opportunities to develop the requisite skills they need for later learning to read. So one of our codes is reading by mom. We wanted to know what reading looked like if mom read to the child at all. And so when you then tag all of the content across 150 participants where mom's talking about reading, it is often the case, not always, with different kinds of qualitative codes, that distributions appear to you. So in this case, we saw variation in the quality of reading that took place. So we developed a 5-point rating scale to index the quality, and we had some very strict criteria for what distinguished a 2 from a 3 and a 3 from a 4 and so on. And so when you can overlay a numerical dimension on top of this coded data, there's really interesting things you can do analytically and really take completely different looks at what you've found within the qualitative medium. The only other thing worth mentioning here is what we call dynamic descriptors. And these are there if you're doing a longitudinal study so that you can track change over time. So, it might be that we're interviewing everybody 3 times. There's an experiment going on after the first interview, and we want to see if what they're talking about around the same themes is different at a different time point. So all of the characteristics of the individual stay the same, but the time point varies, and that's what dynamic descriptors were designed for, although I can tell you people have used them in some creative ways that we never imagined as well. So that is what's happening there. So let me get out of here. Ryan, any questions coming in at this point? Not yet.
Just a quick one. Just a quick question. The database, do you use a proprietary, or do you use MySQL, Oracle? What is the database that you use? That's just a curiosity.
When you ask the really I'm pretty sure SQL Server is the right answer there. The data in Dedoose live on the Microsoft Azure cloud, so we have virtual servers that are delivering the application. Our database lives up there, and so I can get you answers to all these technical questions. I just don't want to misspeak.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, so I'm going to just log in here to Dedoose and give you all a tour. This is my demo project. When you first log into Dedoose, if you set up an account, you'll see something that looks like this. We give everybody a copy of de-identified data from this study so that they can play around. So you can poke around while you're building your own projects. So we navigate through Dedoose using these tiles here at the top. We call this our main menu bar. There's one other workspace, that is your account workspace up here in the header. Here's where you go to change your password and where the business of Dedoose takes place. Your projects workspace is where you're going to go to see any project that you have authorized access to. So I'm going to filter down here to the fresh sample that I set up. And this is where you go to create new projects as well. So that happens down here in the lower right. There's no limit to the number of projects you can be on. So if, for example, you're a dissertation advisor and you've got 5 students working on their own work, you can be linked to their projects so that you can log in and monitor and give feedback within that environment. So let me load up a fresh project. And then I just want to go through the steps of building the main parts of the database by scratch so that you have a sense about what that looks like. I usually refer to this as kind of the shallow dive in Dedoose. We think that, well, there's evidence that learning to navigate through Dedoose is tremendously easier than learning to use in vivo Atlas TI, so that's one of the distinguishing characteristics. And we can certainly talk more about that. So I think that after even an hour session, people should be able to walk away and build a database. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this is the home dashboard for my fresh project here. So here in my media panel, I can hit the plus sign here to add media, or I can simply click import data here in this upper left panel. You can carry out the same activities in different places in Dedoose. I'm going to import some text files. So say I've got some interview transcripts, so I'm going to grab a few here and upload them to the project. There's my warning that it's been updated, and then you'll be alerted when the media are ready for interaction. I'm not sure why my word, sorry. All right, so adding codes to a project can happen in a number of different ways. I'm not a grounded theory researcher myself, so I usually have some ideas for codes before I even start interacting with my data, since I had an interview protocol. That was probably a good guide for preliminary codes. So any place I see this codes panel, I can hit the little plus sign here and add codes. Here's where we would go to turn on that weight system if we wanted to use it. I love that part of Dedoose. We do that with many of our projects, but we usually don't use it until later on, because until you've really become pretty familiar with the nuance and the variation within your database, you're not going to know if you've got a 5-point scale that you can use or a 100-point scale and so on. So you can at any time come back, go to edit that code, turn it on, set the parameters, and then start to apply those ratings. So let me just add one more. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. Let me open up one of my documents here. We can change font size. So creating excerpts in Dedoose is very similar to what you're going to do with an NVivo or Atlas or any of these other tools. We're going to simply block text, and there's a few different ways to actually create an excerpt in this region. One is to simply double-click on codes. We're in editing mode for this particular excerpt now, so this upper right panel, that orange header is your visual cue that you're editing. I can exit editing mode by just clicking out in the document, and I can return by clicking this bracket that appears in the margin. And you can see as I float over it, it also has all the meta information about that particular excerpt. So another way to create excerpts in Dedoose is to use our quick code widget. I'm going to just hit my space bar now after blocking this text. Here's your quick code widget. And again, I can use this just by double clicking on codes. What's nice about this also is we can start to add new codes to the code tree. So if I type the name of a code in that search field that doesn't exist, it's going to add that code to the excerpt as well as add it to my code tree, as you can see here. Okay. So let me just add one more. All right, oopsie, don't want to do that. So that's a simple way to add codes to a project and create and tag excerpts. What can't be done with the quick code widget, however, is changing the tree itself. So for those of you that are familiar with qualitative research, we know that code systems evolve as we kind of go deeper and deeper into our data. We are going to generate new code, so the tree is going to expand vertically. We also might want to change the hierarchy of the tree. So if, for example, I find I'm using my read by uncle and sibling, read by sibling code really infrequently, I may want to group that in a broader category. I've got read by others, so I can just simply drag and drop them and start building out the hierarchy of the tree. And certainly something else that we're always going to do, or often going to do, is lose code. So I can go to my read by uncle code, say I find I used it twice, really doesn't justify a standalone code. I can come in here and go to edit that code. I can simply delete it, or if I want to merge that work, I can choose merge here, select maybe read by others as the code I want to replace, and then submit that. And so anything that I tagged with reading by uncle is now tagged with reading by others, and you can see read by uncle has disappeared from the tree. So that's creating excerpts and tagging. I'm going to just create a few more excerpts here in this project so we have some more data to play with. I'm just scrolling through the documents that I uploaded here. Oops. All right, so let me go back home. So one of the most common activities we're going to engage in once we've got a database built out, at least this far, is to retrieve content. And that can really be done easily from the code tree itself. So as I'm floating over the code here, I have a little excerpt icon that appears, and I can just go ahead and click on that to pull up the associated excerpts. So this reviewer here, you're going to see this throughout Dedoose because it's the result of a query. In this case, the query was really simple. It was, show me everything I tagged with reading by mother. From here, and all of this functionality is designed around the way that we understand people want to move through their data, the things that they want to do with their data. So I can open these excerpts up and review them, change coding, and just scroll through my list if I want to look at them here inside the Dedoose environment. I can export my excerpts. So I can click export here, and there's ways to export your entire database as well. You can choose to export to Excel, Word. Everything in Dedoose can be exported to an appropriate format. So Excel, Word, images can come out as images that you can pop into spreadsheets or presentations and manuscripts. So it all comes out, all the visuals and everything. So let's cancel out of here. And the other thing that we can do from these pop-ups is I can go back to context. So if I want to go and see this particular excerpt in the context of its source document, I'm going to just minimize these panels now. Here I've been taken to that excerpt in the context of its source, and I'm in editing mode for the excerpt. So maybe I want to see and read other things that are happening around it in that context. So that's your basic building of the qualitative aspects of the database. So what I want to do next is import some descriptor information and link it up so that we can really start to look at some of the other visualizations. So I have a spreadsheet with some basic descriptor data. I'm going to just come here to my import data button, select a spreadsheet, find that file. And this, and I'll give you a quick look at our survey importer as well. And this takes advantage of that particular functionality. This questions code that popped up, this is just an artifact of that import, so I'm going to actually delete it. But if we go to our descriptor workspace now, the importer recognizes what is descriptor information based on an algorithm that looks at the column header as a title, but also what's contained within that column. So there was a column titled child gender, and all of the values that were found in that column were female and male. So our importer knows that's descriptor information. So it defines the field for you, applies the appropriate values, and then for each case, it's going to grab that information. We have to check these boxes so you can see. And so it populates the entire descriptor set inside of Dedoose. Now what we haven't done is link those documents to the descriptor information. Okay, so I should say there's no requirement that data be brought into a project in any particular order, because again, it's just connections that are being established, so the time at which that takes place really doesn't matter. Often if we do work along the lines that I'm doing here, where I'm importing documents and then maybe later I'm bringing descriptor information, I might be interacting with my document. I can click this little descriptor icon here in the upper right corner and link it to a particular case. So I'm creating that relationship. If you remember back to the schematic that I showed you, and I'll scroll through some of my other documents and link them to the descriptor. We'll just do one more here. And so now that all of these relationships are established, everything that we've done with those documents is now tied to all the other pieces of information we have about those participants. And you can see now that our charts are starting to populate, which are based on a lot of the descriptor information. So I may want to look at coding variation as a function of child gender. Here's what those visuals look like. And all the visuals, all the charts, plots, tables, and Dedoose are all hot linked to the underlying content. So if I want to see everything that I tagged with reading by mom for female child families, all I have to do is click the bar, and then here's that result. So here's that pop-up again. Here the query was a little bit more complicated, right? Show me everything I tagged reading by mom for females. All right. So hopefully that's all clear. I want to give you a quick look now, if there's no other questions at this point, at our survey importer.
There is one question. Is there a trial version?
There's no trial. Dedoose is just free for a month. So if there's no limit on what you can do with your trial, when you set up an account, we fund it for the first month. So there's no limit. You can play around, do whatever you want. I also didn't want to forget to mention that if you have used In Vivo or other tools, we can move your projects into the Dedoose environment. So if you'd like, if you have a project and you've used other tools, I get in touch with our support team. They'll migrate your project from In Vivo into Dedoose. Then you can set up an account. We link you up to the project, and you're off and running. So what you're looking at here, actually, let me pull up this spreadsheet first. So these are data we collected through SurveyMonkey a number of years ago. We did a survey of the Dedoose user community. And so we've asked how long have you been a user, what gender, and so on, a bunch of demographics. We asked how much do you agree that Dedoose is intuitive, so agreement scale. We also asked open-ended questions like how did you learn about Dedoose, what are your general impressions, and so on. So this spreadsheet didn't just have descriptor information like the import that I did. It had both descriptor information and open-ended narrative. And so what you're looking at here, except for these two child codes that I created in another demo just to start adding more dimension, is a direct import of that spreadsheet into a brand new project. So the survey importer I mentioned already can recognize what is descriptor information. It also can recognize what's narrative. And so for all the descriptor information, you've already seen what that import looks like. But then there were a number of columns with titles like general impressions and things that you like about the interactives. And so for the content that's found in those columns, the importer will create a code from the column header. And then for each participant, it will grab the responses from those questions, compile them into a document, and excerpt and tag that content. So here's what this person said about excerpting and coding, what they said about the website, and it links this document to the descriptor information for that case. So the things that I was showing you that we often are going to be doing manually, if you have data that are contained within a spreadsheet, we can import that, and a lot of those relationships and that indexing is done automatically for you. So let me get out of here. I'm going to take you back to my demo project for the rest of our time together. So given the amount of time we have together today, I just want to talk you through a couple of other workspaces so that you know what's available to you without going into any deep exploration. Your security workspace in Dedoose, this is where you manage access privileges for people that may be working with you. So when you first come here, there's one group, it's called full access, you're in it, which means you can do everything or anything to any object in the database. Now we can control those privileges at a really granular level, and so what we've done is we've pre-programmed in a number of groups that you can add to your project. So as just a simple example, a standard assistant is somebody who you want to upload media, to create excerpts, tag content, link to descriptors, but you don't want them to change the code system. You don't want them to modify descriptor data. You certainly don't want them in the security center. And we don't want them to modify or delete data that they did not create themselves. So it allows people on your team to carry out their responsibilities, but it also maximizes protection of the database. So there's a whole variety of these groups in here to meet a wide range of needs. And with the example of your, with the teaching situation, we might have just guest access. So somebody, they can come in and look around, but they can't actually touch the database at all. So we have all of these groups pre-programmed in. You can add as many as you want to your project, and you can move people around as their levels of trust or their responsibilities change. The training center in Dedoose is one of 3 things that we've done with Dedoose that support team collaboration, consistency, and inter-rater reliability. And so there's a whole section in our user guide that describes these different levels of functionality. And the Dedoose Center, you can actually create tests to assess inter-rater reliability. But we know that that's a process, and so there's different kinds of exercises that you might want to engage in with people who are on your team or in a classroom. And so you can read more about that and how that all functions there. The memos, as I mentioned, maybe it's best if I just show you what it looks like if we're actually doing this live. So say I'm working on this particular excerpt. Here, when I'm in editing mode, I have a little memo icon that appears in the upper right corner. It shows me that there's actually already a linked memo. And so here I want to see my existing memos. Here's the memo that's already linked to this particular excerpt. So I can just create a new one, provide a title. Here are my thoughts and my poor typing. And memos in Dedoose live in groups. And you can, there's a default, but you can also create groups. So here's, for example, an assignments group. If we were giving assignments to students or people on our team, I'm going to call this a coding memo. I can also call it a milestone memo. So I can organize across groups, save that. And now when I go to my memos workspace, which is largely organizational, I can filter by group. So if I pull up for just my coding memos, for example, I can select all of these and then export them, again, along with any associated content, depending on what my plans are to do with them outside of Dedoose. And lastly, let's look at Analyze. We still have about 20 minutes. That's good. So if there's a learning curve component to Dedoose, this is where I would tell you it's going to take you the most time to sort of become familiar with what tables and charts are available to you. We've tried to be very accommodating as we've built out these different features, and people will often, pretty regularly come to us and say, hey, I like a chart that shows this or a table that shows that. And if it's something that we think is going to be of broad value to the community, we'll implement it. And often these things are really easy to add to the system. So in this folder structure here on the left, this is where you're going to find all of these different features. And you're going to find some things in multiple folders. So here in the media charts is what is a code application table. So it's codes by media. You're also going to find that particular table in the codes folder because it involves both codes and media. With the tables, we've mapped frequency to the color spectrum, and I'll give you a better example of that here. But your reds are going to be more frequent and your blues less. So that way, if you're looking at a table and the action's taking place where there's more frequency, your eye is going to quickly go there. So let me give you a look at just a couple of different types of charts. I have 2 different descriptor groups here, so I'm going to select my child gender, and we'll look at mom's work status. So this is just a simple crosstab display. Let me grab reading my mom as our code. So the default settings for and your controls for your visuals you're going to find here in the upper right corner. So the default for this particular visual is a frequency chart that has been normalized, which means we've adjusted the bars relative to each other depending on differences in the number of members of each group. So it visually is informative, even if there's way more not working moms in the study. It's also reported in percentage terms. I can just unclick those now to look at raw counts. So this particular bar right here has 20 excerpts contained in it. And here's one of the places you can actually take advantage of the, 28. I had to put on my glasses. Where we can take advantage of the hierarchy. Okay, so again, if we look at reading by mom, there are some child and indeed grandchild codes associated with that particular category. And so I can include subcodes here. So I'm going to essentially fold up the tree. So that bar that had 28 excerpts in it now has 60, which means there were another 32 excerpts that were tagged with one of the child or grandchild codes for reading by mom. So that way we can grab that whole family of excerpts if we want to analyze data at that level, or we can go back to being much more specific. So I'm going to toggle this to a weight chart now, remembering that we had a 5-point rating scale to index quality. And so here's a really different look at our data. Now we're looking at the relative quality of reading experiences these kids are having as a function of their gender and mom's work status. So we've introduced this dimension to the database, and it tells us perhaps a really interesting and important story. So here is a different view. This is your code co-occurrence matrix. And the idea here is that to help you discover patterns. All the visuals actually are designed around initially the things that we were building for ourselves because we like visuals in our presentations and manuscripts. They really kind of help us communicate what we're looking for in a study. And patterns that, you know, across a larger population in a study can be really hard to hold in your head. So, you know, if you're reading interview number 1 and you realize, hey, mom's talking about reading to her children, at the same time she's talking about letter recognition, hadn't thought of that. Reading interview number 30, you have likely going to have a hard time remembering the patterns that may have been discovered in interview 1. So this is that 30,000-foot view on your whole sample and how people are reporting to you around the themes that are of interest to you. So this did turn out to be relatively frequent in our study, so we can pull up those excerpts. And what we found in our study was that when moms are talking about reading to their kids, they're often also pointing out letters to help their child try to start to recognize the symbols. So point out the first letter of the paragraph when I'm reading, and then see if my child can remember them. Okay, so that's what's happening there. And let's just look at one more. And I'll show you a quick glimpse at the filtering engine, and then we will open up for questions. So this is just a quick look at the relative number of participants in our option list descriptor field. So descriptor data can be option list or categorical. They can be numbers, they can be dates, and they can be text. So those typical different forms of data. So I'm going to click this male piece of the pie here. So I've done the query. Here it was, showing me all the excerpts I tagged with male child families. But what I didn't show you from these pop-ups also is that I can actually activate a filter. So it may be that I want to focus my analysis just on male child families because I'm writing a manuscript with that just focused on males. So down here in this lower right corner, I can click this Make Active Set. And this activates a database-wide filter. And so a simple place to show you that is here. So here's my bar chart frequencies, but the only data being displayed are from male child families. When a filter is active, there are 2 visual cues. One is the data set icon in the main menu bar is shaded red. And you'll also see that this funnel here in the panel header appears. And we can use the funnel to toggle the filter on and off. It's still active. I've just sort of deactivated it visually. And so now any place that I go in this project is only going to be on data that come from male child families. And it's here in this data set workspace where you can create much more complex filters. I can save filters for later use. I'm going to clear this one. But we can create filters based on codes that have been applied. You can filter based on the work that individuals on the project have done. So any object in the database can be used as a filter, filtering or part of a filter using Boolean operators. So we can create really complex filters here. We can create filters directly from the visuals, and in the excerpts workspace, you can also create filters based on any number of criteria, and you can actually build them out. That's a relatively new feature that we find people are really enjoying. So I'm just looking at my notes. So in terms of comparisons to NVivo and these other traditional tools, you know, there's a tremendous amount of overlap in what you can do with all of them. I think one of the things that puts Dedoose apart, obviously, is its cloud-based nature and what that allows us to do in terms of collaboration. It makes it really easy for us to deploy new features without any burden on the end user. You log into Dedoose and you've got it. Trying to think of what else. I know one of the other things, that Ryan had mentioned was PDFs. So so if you want to do a literature review in Dedoose, I'm just filtering by type here so I can find my PDF down the bottom. Whoopsie. Oh, there it is. So this is an annual report, and we can use either a text mode for excerpting or an image. So say I want to, I'm going to go into image mode so I can treat this as an image and we'll excerpt this lovely face. So I'm just creating a region around that part of the image, and looks like it's having taking a little time to draw it. But I'm going to go ahead and just double click on codes. There's the excerpt. So now we've created that excerpt in that region. Let me scroll to some text. So I can go to text mode here and then treat text in very natural ways and create excerpts in that area. So what we find people are doing with PDFs, you know, as an example, literature review, but people have PDFs as resources in their projects as well, is use descriptor information to keep all of the citation information, and then you can excerpt and tag the content to your heart's desire, and you have all that information so you can pull up your excerpts from a particular subset of your documents based on any kind of criteria that you've defined as descriptors to help group them all together.
Eli, quick question there. When you import a PDF, does that then live in the database there, or is the PDF still on your local drive? And if that local drive PDF gets deleted, is that a problem?
Data, once they are submitted to Dedoose, they live in your project. So a copy has been saved in the Dedoose database. Okay. So, yeah, if you lose, so I mean, I don't know. I can tell you one of the challenges using Atlas. You know, at UCLA, it's still my responsibility to support people who use whatever tools they want. Atlas is complicated because sometimes it doesn't store the media within a project or hermeneutic unit. It maps, and so if you change computers and that mapping isn't there, or if the resource is deleted from your computer, you can lose all of that work or disconnect it. So that's not an issue. Once you've submitted something to Dedoose, the database owns it, and depending on people's privileges, anybody that has access to that project has access to those resources as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I know it's a lot. When I was talking with Ryan about planning, it was kind of like I'm sometimes reluctant to go too deep into Dedoose because if you haven't seen it, it can be a lot to digest all at once. So I'm glad that this is being recorded for you to review. The other things to mention from my notes, Ryan had mentioned that people appreciate case studies. So I'm gonna make available to Ryan a couple of pieces that I've written, our trainer guide, and I will also point you to the IMMR Global website. This is an Institute for Mixed Methods Research that I'm associated with, and one of the things that we've done with this website is put up a whole bunch of resources. And so we have all of these resources available, categorized in different ways. So some you'll find either articles that use Dedoose or Ethnonotes, which was the predecessor product to Dedoose, as well as all kinds of other literature that may be of value to you. We've just kind of taken the gems out of our lab at UCLA, and if we had a PDF copy of it, you can download it right from this website. So that's one place you can look for other things. We're also in the final throes of writing a textbook for Dedoose. So it's coming out in early 2019. with Sage Publications. And one of the things that we did is include case studies in each of the chapters. So we've gone out to people who we know are kind of talented Dedoose users, from HIV prevention work to mentoring young people to international work that was done by the RAND Corporation. And so those case studies will be written into each of the chapters to really illustrate the many different disciplines that have taken advantage of Dedoose and how they've taken advantage of the features to benefit their work. So we're really pretty excited about that. And yeah, so questions that might be popping up as we come to the end of our hour?
As far as the different types of media that you can import, I believe you can import audio and video. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that, the different things you can import for?
Sure. Let's pull up a video file. Oh, let me turn down the volume, or this is going to be. This is my son. He's now a college graduate. This is a few years back. My kids love that I put their videos into Dedoose. This is your primary workspace, both for video and audio. If you were dealing with an audio file, the only difference would be you just see a sound wave here. So you can zoom in and out on the timeline using the slider at the bottom. Here we've created excerpts within the media. So you can see these blue brackets actually mark the boundaries of excerpts, so I can adjust them. The pink bar is your playhead. And the same way, when we're in editing mode for a text excerpt, you just double-click codes to apply them. This is your view if you have transcribed audio, or if you want to transcribe audio. This is an active editor here on the right. And so what's going to happen here is you're actually going to synchronize. So that particular excerpt, I'm not sure how clear it is on your view. There's a little start marker here on the right side of the text and this little purple end marker. So that excerpt has already been synchronized to this text. And we can actually continue typing, and you see that end marker moves along. So if you hit that excerpt in a search, you're going to have both the clip and the text available to you in the result. And yeah, so what we find in Dedoose, sometimes what people are doing is they're excerpting the stream, and then they're only transcribing the audio where they actually create excerpts. So they're not spending the resources transcribing everything if they're really not going to take advantage of that content.
So there's a question, is the program transcribing that audio for you?
I wish. Unfortunately not. And this is what an image looks like, very similar to what we saw with PDF into how we interact with it. Yeah, unfortunately voice-to-text technology isn't quite there yet. We're counting on Google, because Google likes to do all this great work and then open source it. So you can be sure, if that technology gets built to a level at which that we're happy, we will dial it in. I promise you that. Lots of people have asked for that. I'd love to have it myself. So
another question that came up was what your son was playing when he's playing the cello.
Oh, well, I'll let you play it. Scherzo. I don't know. Yeah, I always like to, well, I shouldn't make fun of it. I'm Jewish and my wife is Chinese, so I always ask people what the odds are that our kids play classical music. All of them did. He's actually pretty good. There's David. So there you go. But thank you for asking. We're very proud of him.
Thank you. You get folks saying that he's pretty good. He's a very good. Thanks. Yeah, there's a cellist online here. So.
I'll let him know that his audience has expanded. Yeah, so trying to think of other things to tell you if you haven't, please interrupt me, Ryan, but we've got a lot of resources available online to support you. The user guide, they're all on our website. We actually have a help center, but I think we're going to be removing it from the app itself because it's just more clutter and everything's on the website. So you can just click here. Oh, we actually have already changed it. Okay, so now they're just links. So you can click through to the user guide, which is a separate website. It's all very easily navigated and searchable. And we've got lots of little little GIFs inside the, I'm trying to find one if I have an example. Let's see. So within the user guide, you can see if there's something relevant, we'll have, here's a 1:38 long little video for you. So try to provide all kinds of supports there. What else can I tell you? The only other questions that you haven't asked is the data security. And, you know, Dedoose is in use around the world. You know, we came out of university. That was where we started. So you can expect that we appreciate the requirements of internal institutional review boards. And the other thing that has been really satisfying to me, because I really don't get the high-end technical stuff, is that we've been vetted by data security officers at major institutions, private research corporations, and so their officers get into conversations with our lead tech, and it's a language that I don't understand, and we have yet to be prohibited from any of these organizations. So once they find out what we're really doing from both an encryption, protection, backup, and all of that, everybody's been satisfied with what we've done. So when I hear that, it just provides more confidence for me that I can continue to trust our programmers. But it's way beyond me what they've accomplished here. And yeah, so again, I will make these resources available to all of you. If anybody adopts Dedoose for the classroom, we're always happy at no cost to come and provide a, do a session for you in a more interactive way. And, I imagine that there's a wide variety of people at Phoenix that maybe work in different areas. And so if it makes sense to, create have another couple of sessions to be more focused on how Dedoose might be used in one context to another, Ryan, please reach out. We'll be happy to make those arrangements.
Absolutely. You already have people that are wondering whether University of Phoenix has or will get a contract so students can use it, use Dedoose for their work. So, let's definitely keep the conversation going. I know Mark, one of the deans, my boss, is online, as well as a number of the other research chairs, and let's definitely keep that conversation going because it seems like there's a lot of interest.
Great.
Already.
Well, I do appreciate the opportunity. I mean, a couple of academics start a company. You can imagine we're a little slow to ramp up, and certainly we're newer to the game than QSR and Atlas and these other developers. But again, for us as scholars particularly, we're really proud of Dedoose because indirectly we're contributing to the mission of what research is all about. We do our own work, we support teams as consultants, but to build something that brings value to others is really gratifying, and so having the opportunity to work with University of Phoenix would be awesome.
Great, thank you very much. And a lot of people, if you want to flip into chat, you can see a lot of people that are thanking you for the intro, and that mentioning they're going to give it a try. And
there we go.
And coming to the end, I don't want to keep you longer than I allotted for time-wise, but thank you very much for the introduction and making time to come and talk with us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for all of you for joining, and have a great evening, assuming we're in the evening zone.
Yep. Great. Right. Thank you, Eli. And thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You too. Bye, everybody.